Alrighty. So in this webinar, we will be talking about donation acknowledgement. So this webinar does assume that you've already become familiar with donation configuration. So the configuration and creation of gift sources, funds, programs, campaigns, and associated configurations, as well as donation entry. So that includes batch gift, not necessarily batch, that includes quick add gift and the way to add gift through invoices. If you're not familiar with those processes, I recommend checking them out either through tutorials or other webinars. So today we'll be talking about donation acknowledgement. So we're going to talk about setting the template for the system that the system will use for donation acknowledgement. We'll talk about setting templates for individual funds. And obviously we will also talk about the editing and creation of templates. We will also then, after we complete that configuration item, then go into the process of actually acknowledging the donation, both via email and via print. So let's go ahead and get started. So we'll start with how to set the templates, and then we'll actually go in how to edit a template. So the general flow for donation acknowledgement in the system is that as you enter a donation, the system will take that donation's information, pair it up with a template that you have configured, and tuck it away under Send Acknowledgements for you later to email or print. There's another option of skipping, we'll talk about that later. So in order for the system to know what template to use, we have to tell it. And we have two levels we can do that at. The first is under Acknowledgement Settings. In the Acknowledgement Settings screen, we have a variety of templates that we must set. If you're new to the system and you go to enter a fund or a donation and you get a notice screen indicating that you must set your templates, it will direct you here because these must be set in order to use donations. Otherwise, the system will not know what template to use and it will cause issues. So in my current configuration, I only have 4 templates that must be set. If we modify how we use soft credits, you may have up to 6. So I'll keep this on the screen for the time being. The templates all cover various situations. The left-hand side is most of the donations that you're going to handle, and the right-hand side is specifically for pledges. So let's run through them really quick. Acknowledgement template. This is the majority of donations. This is for any donation that is not a tribute, a pledge, or a soft credit itself. So this will handle most donations. The next one down is when it's a tribute donation. As a reminder, a tribute is when a donation's in honor of, in memory of, or on behalf of. The third template is the soft credit template. Now this isn't when you use soft credit, this is when, as we see here, we generate a separate letter for our soft credit donors. So when we use soft credit, that's indicating that somebody else is attached to the donation in some way, usually a spouse, a partner, potentially a company that you work for, or an employee of a company, or sometimes donor advised funds, the advisor will be the soft creditee. So if we wish to generate a separate letter for when someone is soft credited, we use this option and we will have a template for them. So these are regular donations. When we're dealing with pledge payments, those are a form of donation, but there's a specific type of donation. And for those, we have individual templates like we have over here. So the pledge payment itself, if it's attributed pledge payment, and if someone is soft credited on that pledge payment. With these templates, as we see later, we have placeholders that will allow you to pull the pledge's information and allow you to kind of do a mini invoice on in current state of the pledge for the person. So let's go ahead and set this back to combine. That is the most common setting. So when we are setting our templates, we can pick from an existing one. We can create a new one, which we will do later, or after we select it, we can preview it or edit it. So we'll play with the editor in a little bit. We can do that with all the tribute templates that we need. So before we move on, I do want to make sure to touch on some of these other settings. Acknowledgement number settings, most organizations will not need this. This is to power a particular placeholder used for certain jurisdictions that have particular guidelines and the requirement of acknowledgement numbers on letters for tax purposes. I do not believe the IRS requires this, but certain other national revenue services do. I believe Canada is one of them. Um, so if your government does require this, this is where you can set how that numbering system will work, prefix, suffix, and where to start from. Combined soft credit. Most organizations will want these combined. This means that the soft credit will not get their own separate letter, and only the primary donor will. As we saw earlier, we can have a separate letter for the soft creditee. Next, and this is an important setting, acknowledgement preference, by gift, by donor. The system will default to by donor, but a lot of organizations run off by gift. So what is the difference? So what this means is by gift, every donation, no matter what, will have its own letter. So if I donate twice in a week, and you acknowledge every week, once a week, I will still get 2 separate letters. What by donor does is the acknowledgement is actually going to include the totals and dates and information from multiple donations in a single letter. So this means that if I donated twice in a week, say Wednesday and Thursday, and you acknowledge every Friday, since the last time you did acknowledgements, last Friday, I've donated twice. Thus, I would normally have 2 letters, but by donor means that you'll only have the 1 letter with it combined. So some organizations use this, some do not. It can save on paper, but some people like the breakdown a bit better. The last setting on this page is send auto acknowledgement for online donations. So this is only used if you're using public pages, the upcoming More Web integration, or WordPress integration. What this means is that whatever you've set up for your donation acknowledgement templates will be used without the ability to override, which we'll talk about later, and that letter will be emailed along with the invoice for the transaction to the donor. So something to keep in mind. A lot of organizations do use this. This means any letter that is sent out via this mechanism will not be added to the queue for later sending out, and you won't have the option necessarily to print a donation acknowledgement. So, any questions on the settings on this page before we go up a level?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, so obviously save button, we move on. So this sets our tribute templates for the whole system. That's our main piece that we want to think about on this one. So what if we don't want the general letter used for a specific fund? So we can override the templates we set here for the whole system by setting a different template on a per fund basis. So what we can do here is we can go out of acknowledgement settings where we set the generic letter for the whole system, and we can go to configurations. Oops, it's going to yell at me about the page having data change because I technically did. And we can go to configuration funds. Now, as a reminder, a fund basically says what the donation is. And a lot of times in previous webinars, you'll hear me describe it as how you handle that donation. So let's go down here to funds. And that's kind of the reason why I phrase it that way is in regards to donation acknowledgement, because we can set different letters for different funds. So if we have a general fund, it would probably use the generic letter. We don't do anything there. But event sponsors might get a different letter. So an event sponsorship fund would have a different letter. So when we're creating that fund, or after we've created it, we can edit it. We can go to the Acknowledgement Setup tab. So I'm just going to click there. And we can override our generic template. So in this particular scenario, I'm using the generic template for regular donations, but soft credit and tribute, I'm using something different. I may choose to decide to change this. So maybe I'm going to use, I don't think I have one specifically set up for events, but let's use template number, let's use gift thank you. So whatever template I have used here for the generic one for the entire system is currently overridden for this fund. So that's the second place where we can set templates. Now the third one I kind of hinted at earlier is we can do a manual override during the actual acknowledgement process, and we'll talk about that in about 10 minutes. So this way we can have different funds with different letters. So any questions about that option? I'm gonna go ahead and save while we're paused for a moment.
Nope.
No? Okay, cool. So now that we've set our templates for the whole system, we've set a generic, we've set templates for individual funds. If a template for a fund is going to be the same as the generic, I would not set the fund template, and that way it'll fall back to the generic, so you can just change it in one spot. I have had people where they'll set the generic and then go to each fund and set the fund, and then when they go and change their generic, there's an issue where they find that their letter is not updating, and it's because they also set it on the fund. So they end up with 2 points they have to update. So only set a fund if it will be different from the generic. If it's not different from the generic, from the general under acknowledgement settings, then don't set anything under fund. You'll save yourself some time and hassle later on. Okay, so now that we've set these templates, comes the question of, well, how do we create a template or edit a template or generally work with templates? So for that, obviously, we've seen that we can create them here, we can edit them here, and that will go into the editor. Alternatively, as you may have noted, as is mentioned on the communications webinar, every template in the whole system is stashed and stored under managed templates. This is donation templates, membership, newsletter templates, and a few others that you may use. So for our purposes today, let's go ahead and go to Manage Templates and just become a little familiar with this screen, because it's an excellent place to manage your donation acknowledgement templates, make new ones, edit existing ones, and so on. So we're going to come here to Manage Templates. Now for our purposes, we're lucky, well, not lucky, but we're doing acknowledgement, so that's where we come by default. All the other templates would be from this drop-down as a point of reference. But here we have acknowledgements, soft credit, tributes, and tribute cards. So your regular acknowledgement and tribute and the first of the pledge ones will be under acknowledgements. Your soft credits are here, your pledge and regular tributes are here. So we break them up into sections. And then tribute cards, which we're not talking about today. Unless we have time, we may be able to get them in. So here I have a list of all my templates. As you can see, I have a fair number. Some of them probably could be deleted because I don't really need them, especially all these untitled. So to edit template, we have the edit button. To delete, copy, and preview. So let's go ahead and delete one, just for, as an example. So that untitled is now gone. And I could continue on like that, deleting more in the untitles. But let's go ahead and create a brand new one, because some of these aren't necessarily in the best of shape, having also been my demo system. So let's create a brand new one today and at least get something resembling a decent template. So we're going to go add template. This is the same as going create template from one of those other screens. And we're going to pick our initial layout. Now, the pictures give you kind of a sense of the layout, not by too much. These ones do come with a little bit of verbiage. I usually recommend layout template number 1. It is a good starting point. It's got a lot of good functions and features in it, but for the most part, any one of these templates can be converted into the others. So, for my purposes, let's use layout template number 1. And I'm going to go ahead and select template. And what this is going to do is I'm going to pull up a new template. It's going to set it up to the basic layout of layout template number 1, and we'll be able to make modifications. Please forgive my slow internet. So here we go. So this is our dummy template, and a couple things become apparent really quickly. We have sections. You can mouse over them. You can see them. We can copy, edit, and delete them. These sections are actually over here on the right-hand side. And so this is what you see is what you get, drag and drop widget-based editor. Kind of a mouthful, that one. And what this means is these sections, I can, as you see, delete them. I can also drag and drop a new one in. Drop the widget here. And then when I drop it, it's actually going to ask me to put the details. So this will let you put your Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, and Twitter handles. If I don't have anything in a field, it will drop it in this case. So I'm going to set aside this widget for the time being so that we can focus on probably the more used one of text. So I'm actually going to delete this. But before we start modifying our template, something needs to be addressed probably first off, and that's the name of our template. Untitled. As you saw, I had a lot of untitles in my demo system. I am never going to know which one is which. So it's a good idea to title your template really quick and early on. So we're going to go ahead and edit. That's what this button does here, edit the template as a whole. We're going to give this a name. So let's call this the general thank you Let's call it the nice one so I can remember that later. And we're going to give it a code. Now these codes are whatever you want them to be. This is just to help address the fact that you may have multiple templates that have the same name but are different. So code, as you may come across it elsewhere in the system, is just a unique identifier. You get to create it, use whatever nomenclature you want. A lot of times I'll do like DA1, DA2, donation acknowledgement, or things like that to make it up. Let's see where I'm at right now. Let's just call this DA6. Cool, hasn't been used yet. And then we can categorize them. So this is a way you can organize them a bit. Sometimes you can come into an old acknowledgement letter that you're not using anymore and categorize it as obsolete. That way you have them all tucked away into obsolete, and I'll show you how that organization comes into play. I could just call this, general, because that's one of my current categories. And it's going to put it in the general category. We'll see that in a little bit. Just something to help organize. Not everybody uses it. And then save. So now our template has a name, has a code, it's nice and organized, and we can work with it. So let's start making some changes. Well, first off, we have this text image button section. Well, the button was taken out in this case, but this is a great way to do a header, and this widget actually comes with it. So let's actually start by making this into a decent header. So let's edit it. And it's going to bring it over here on the right-hand side. Now, as you can see, there are a fair number of options and fields that we can modify. We can modify the text itself and the image, but we can also do things with the image width, column width, alignments, and what have you. For a lot of you, you won't need to do anything particularly interesting with these options. You can leave them as the defaults, but others you may consider tinkering with it and getting a bit more exotic in your layouts. So I would recommend just do a little experimentation. Left column width over here, right column width. The button usually goes underneath it. By aligning an image to the left, it puts it over here, and the text to the right, it puts it over here, so they're kind of in line. If this had enough text to hit here, you'd actually get a word wrap. Just some fun things to know. And then under styling, we can deal with the spacing. So this would put more space at the bottom, left, right, top, and then various other properties to tinker with the font size, font color, things like that. So as you can see, there's a lot of options in here. You can get really customized. I recommend start simple until you're more familiar with the editor. I'm not going to go into every single option because obviously there's a large number. I just recommend play with it. Make a template, tinker with it, see what it does. Okay, so let's go back to content. So let's start and put a little content in here. Let's put an image in here. So click here or drag and drop. I'm going to go ahead and go to my desktop, which has a variety of things. Monte Cristo Arts Center, that's my made-up organization. I got a terrible logo, but let's use it. Open it up and put it in. So it's going to open up a little bit of an editor. This editor does allow you to make some changes, resize. It can be helpful. I'm just going to leave it as is because my image, I think, is actually pretty decent. So this is where I might want to change my image width, maybe take it to 200. Let's take it a little higher. Let's take it to 250. There we go. So that's where your image widths and height and things can make a difference. So I was trying to squish it into a square area. So now I have a logo. Not too bad. Not great, but it's not too bad. And now I might want to change the text over here. So currently it says, some date from last year, company name, and some lorem ipsum text for the date, the address. You might want this to instead have your organization's information. So there's a couple of options of how we can handle this. Ideally, the date would be today, company name would be your organization's, and the address would be your address. So this is where we can start playing with placeholders. So let's start with this date. Well, I don't want to have to edit my template every day and put in a new date. So let's delete that date. But we still want the date. So we can start using placeholders. So let's click on placeholders, and we'll see that we have a lot of placeholders, and we will go through a good number of them today. The one right now we're interested in, let me see, where is it, is date. This will pull the date when you generate the letter. So let us do, let's see what our format, let's use the more European format because I've been kind of preferring that myself these days. And we'll do day of month, month name, space, and current year. And we'll notice that wherever my cursor was down here, it's putting in the placeholder. So right now what this is going to do is it's going to put in these placeholders. when I generate a letter later, what it will look like is 10 May 2016. And I could change the order. I just decided to use the day, month, year format, which I've been preferring myself personally lately. And then from here, we get some more choices. We can play more with placeholders, or we could hard code this information in. So we actually have placeholders that can pull your organization's information from your account information. So if you go to accounts.fundly.com, log in, go to the first page, organization information, we can pull that data in a placeholder. So the joy of that is if your organization is planning to move, may move, somewhat regularly depending on situations, you might find that you don't want to go back and change that information in all your templates. So you can use placeholders. But in this case, since that stuff does not tend to change too often, you could also lock it in. But let's go ahead and play with placeholders a little bit more. So I'm going to go down a line, and we're going to use the client placeholders. Now these are important placeholders because these will pull your information. You're the client. They will not pull contact information. It's common confusion. So when you want to pull the contact, the donor's information, do not use client. You are the client. They are your contact. They're the donor. And we'll use different placeholders for them. But we can go ahead and go client name, new line, and we can build an address. Address line 1, city, what's that, comma I think goes there, state, it already has the abbreviation in the period, and zip code. And we could take this further. We could, in addition to that, put in your email address, phone number, and whatever else pleases you. And let's go ahead and do this as well. Client name, let's bold that. So we can also format our placeholders a bit and close. So here we have it. When you look at it in this view, it doesn't show much, so we have to use our imaginations a little bit. But now the system will fill that in for us with the data from our system and the current date. So placeholders are very powerful. They're the heart and soul of a template because they're going to make the difference between writing it yourself and having the system generated. Okay, so let's push on. So now we have this template, this widget up here. Let's move on to the next one. This is the text widget. This is your most common widget. This is the widget that is the bread and butter, as it were, of your donation acknowledgement. So let's delete all that content. And the editor, we saw it earlier, but we didn't play with it, is pretty straightforward. If you use any word processor, most of these functions should be familiar. Bold, italic, underline, strike through, alignment options, listing options, styling options, font color, background color, insert an image, insert a table. These ones get a little fancier, but you can do some cool stuff, like you can put a table in and put images in the table so that you can have kind of like a 3x3 image section. Normally see that in newsletters, but you could do it in an acknowledgement, and a couple other options. So let's go ahead and put together a very simple donation acknowledgement. So dear, all right, dear whom? So this is where our placeholders come in again. So in a contacts record, we have a couple of fields. We have first name and last name, obviously, and we have full name, which is a combination of the two. We also have formal and informal salutation. Now, what these fields is there's a contradiction there. Anyway, what those fields are they allow us to, instead of using someone's first name or last name or the hard-coded option of the two together, we can modify and set how we refer to them in various situations. So the default in the system, as I believe, informal salutation is usually set the first name, and formal the first name, last name. You can change these. The main menu, default salutations, it's up and it'll update overnight. And you can also change them manually. So they can be really helpful. So if you have a Robert, you can set them to Bob, or vice versa. So a lot of times for donation acknowledgement, you're going to want to use formal or informal, but some people will use first name. In the case of householded contacts, there is also a household salutation, which is usually the combination of two spouses or partners. In an upcoming release, I don't have a date on that, there will be an informal and formal household salutation differentiation. But for the time being, it's only household. So that can be good for people who donate as a household. So let's go ahead and use informal. And I just select it and it adds it in, comma, and then from here I can put my text. So I can go, thank you for your donation of which is tax deductible. So obviously here I've got some holes in my sentence. So thank you for donation of. Well, this is where we can use placeholders. So here we're going to go down into the gift section and we have gift amount. So thank you for your donation of X amount on, well, gift date of which, and we have placeholders for tax deductible value. So now we have a very, very basic donation acknowledgement. Now, my advice, go further. Tell your story. The best way to make them, to really thank them is to let them know how that donation made an impact. So a little advice here, don't keep it simple. Elaborate. Have a full letter. So don't just have the bare minimum tax information. Actually tell the story of how the donation mattered, how it made a difference, or how similar donations made a difference. If you work directly with people who benefit from it, put some quotes in there of how that donation had benefited them, and them saying thank you. Or even quotes from other donors saying, why they made the donation. And so on and so forth. Same thing concept goes with when you're actually doing appeals. So very similar there, kind of thought process you have when you're making the appeal, connecting the donor, the prospective donor with your organization. Well, here you're doing the same thing. You're cultivating a relationship. So you want to make sure that the donor isn't just feeling like, oh, I have a technical letter, but actually, this letter's to me. And that's another place where placeholders help, is they let you personalize the letter a bit more. Regards, and then your name, something like that. So let's talk a bit more about some of these placeholders. Client is you, contact is the donor, contact address, the donor's address, current date. This will pull the event the donation is linked to, all the donations information, including the soft credit donors. For in-kind donations, you would actually, instead of using amount, you would use in-kind description and value. So this is where you may consider making a fund specifically for in-kind donations so that you can use those placeholders and prevent confusion. Individual contacts, various information. When you're acknowledging organizations, you can use that. This is also where formal and informal is very powerful because organizations also have informal and formal, so you don't have to create two separate letters for organizations. When you're doing your pledge template, program and campaign data, and we're not talking about the process today, but when you're building your year-end thank you template, you're going to use transaction grid, which will present the donation's date, amount, program, and tribute information. This time unconfigurable, but those are the 4 things it will give you. So that's placeholders. 2 last things about the editor. We can full screen it. This is really nice when you're doing your actual editing. And for those inclined, you can look at the HTML source. Don't get too fancy here. Because we do want these things to be mobile responsive, and sometimes hand-coded HTML does not necessarily come out as tidy as you'd like. So close, save. Any questions about editing templates? Obviously I didn't go into every feature of it, but I'm hoping I gave you enough to familiarize you with it, but I do want to make sure that if there's any questions. Okay, so before we move on, I do want to mention button is exactly what you think it is. It can make a button you can click on and redirect. This is good for email stuff, usually newsletters, but sometimes emailed. Acknowledgements, image, let's put an image. We saw button text, social media, text, 2-column, which is basically 2 text columns. And using this, you can actually build a left-hand margin with like your board of directors in it, and then the right hand becomes your actual content. So we can support that layout if you want. Speaking of layout, you can modify the page layout. Currently, this gives you a lot of space on the left hand, the right, the top, the bottom. which basically is going to set your margins. You can reduce this space, it's measured in pixels, and thus have less margin. So if you do need a little bit of margin control, is what I call it, this is how you can set it. Um, okay, so now that we have a template, it's simple, but nice enough. Our system will use it. So I didn't set this throughout the system, but I think I'm going to real quick, and I'll just leave it. So now we have our templates. We've created templates. We've set the default template. We've set it per fund. Now it's time to start acknowledging. So at this point, we would start entering donations. As mentioned, other webinars have covered that. We can use quick add gift. We could use it go through an invoice. We could use batch gift entry. Maybe it came in through online. We didn't do auto acknowledge. Donations can be entered through a myriad of sources, but as long as it wasn't auto acknowledged or skipped, then it will appear under send acknowledgements. Okay, so we're going to spend the rest of today's session covering this process, and actually it'll go pretty quick. So send acknowledgement, I'll often refer to as the queue, and basically exactly, yeah, it's just a queue. It's a waiting holding pin for letters that need to go out. And it's organized in a variety of ways. So the first thing is we have the primary, which is for primary donors. We have tributes for tribute letters. We would have soft credit if we had soft credits, but I don't do that in this system. And tribute cards when we use the tribute card functionality when entering donations, which I'm probably not going to be covering today. We have it then broken up into the template that's going to be used. So here my system uses a lot of different templates. And I could go all, and that would let me acknowledge every letter all at once, regardless of template. Or I could actually go and look at and only process specific templates. Now, when we enter a gift, quick add gift real quick, there is the option to skip it, the acknowledgement. And what this does, I'm not going to save that, is it adds it to the skipped acknowledgements, and as you see, those don't actually get acknowledged. So they get tucked into this skipped acknowledgement batch. If you do an acknowledge all, you won't include them, and it basically means we don't plan to acknowledge them in this system. But we can go back into the skipped and we can remove them from that list and actually acknowledge them later. So let's talk a little bit about our options on this screen. So let's just view a particular batch, and we have an actions bar, the button down here, which gives us our options. So option number 1, generate all. That is going to generate a batch with the name that we have here, put all the letters into that batch, and allow you to print and email them. Or generate selected. That could be where where I could say, you know what, I'm only going to pick those people who gave to the general fund. Or I can change templates. So, or I can even skip them, excuse me, but I'm going to do change templates. So we could say that this person with general letter number 2, we don't like general letter number 2. We're going to phase it out. So we select Mr. Adam Normal MD, and we're going to change his template. So we pick a new template. What was the one I just made? It was the one that had the word nice in it, I think. Nice, there it is, general thank you nice, and save. So now we change that to general thank you nice, and it's now going to use that letter instead. So, and we can look at the details and so on. So let's run a batch. Now, one thing I do want to mention, in order for us to send someone an email or print a letter and mail it, we have to have, well, an email or an address. Further, in their contact record, we need to have the communication set to either send mail yes or send email yes in order to actually email them. And that's what this communication preference column does. It tells us what the person has. So some people will actually have different templates for different modes of sending out, and that's another place where you can filter for just emails and then just select them and send just emails and then do it for mail. However, if someone has it to not set, you will not be able to send to them. So you may consider for the time being not selecting those people, or take this opportunity to go back into the record and update it because normally if you've got a donation, you've got some sort of contact information. So it could be a data entry oversight, or it could simply be an error, someone clicked the wrong button for communication preferences. So do keep that in mind. Before we acknowledge, we do want to make sure that they have something set here. And I'll show you what happens in a little bit in regards to that if they don't, and how we can handle that scenario. So let's do this. Let's grab these 10 people. And let's acknowledge them in a single batch. So I'm just going to leave the batch name for today as it is, and I am going to do generate selected. Actually, before I do that, there is one more option that often gets overlooked, and that's download data. This option would actually allow you to do donation acknowledgement via some mechanism outside the system. So some people have their own templates they've created, and for either they can't be created in our template system, which is few and far between, or they just prefer the old-fashioned approach. This will allow you to do that. So what I can do is mark batches processed, which basically will mark these emails as acknowledged in your engagement history, and download the data. And so I'll get a file with all the donations. Actually, I think it's all the donations. So I think this is all. And then you can do like a mail merge or send it to a mailing house to handle, depending on how you handle this. Some organizations work with tens of thousands of donations at a time, and so they have to work with a mailing house to handle them. So I'm not going to do that, but just want to make sure you knew the options present. So let's generate selected, and now we go into the donation acknowledgement process itself, into a batch. So let's give it a second. Our batch creates, and now we have some things to handle. So here on the first screen, we see over here our communication preferences, email and mail. This person will have both an email and a mail, just an email, just a mail. This person has neither. And the system will note to you that there are people that have no preference, and thus we can't continue until they're handled. So we could delete them from this batch one by one. Delete won't delete the letter, it just puts them back in the queue. So it puts them back on the previous screen, and we can handle them later. We can also preview, by the way. So we can delete them one by one, but a better trick that I like is click on one or more recipients. Okay, we only have the 2. Select all, action, delete. Or we can take the gamble and try to set their preferences in mass. I'm going to go ahead and delete and keep my life simple. So Mrs. Laura T, who I know actually has nothing in her record, we're going to delete her from the batch, and she will be sent back to the queue. Now, if I click on all again, I will notice that everybody's got something set. You'll also know that I now have an email and a mail tab. And so now that everybody's got a preference set, we can continue. If I go to email, I put my sender name, subject line, sender email, and hit send. So sender name, Monte Cristo Arts Center. Sender email, let's do Eric. At fundly.com. And thank you for your donation. And just in case, I'm going to put the word demo on there. And then send email. Bam. It will now be sent out. I forgot to mention there is a preview option for the emails if you want to take one last preview of them. But now those emails are sent out, and our batch has the partially processed status. So what this means is that part of it's been sent out or processed, the other has not. This is what status you'll get when you've maybe printed and not emailed, or emailed and not printed, or somehow done some combination therein. It is theoretically possible if you went back, change preferences to have half of it emailed and half of it not emailed. But normally you don't want to do that. But that's what partial processed status means. So no longer generated, but partially processed. Mail, we now get to print. And we have 3 printing options. Print HTML prints it from the browser. I don't recommend this option. Some people do enjoy it. You will need to make sure that your browser's printing page setup, all that's set up appropriately. And a common issue here is the browser will put the URL of the page into the template. So you might need to adjust your page setup so that that is not present in the footer. Came up actually yesterday in a version 1 conversation. Otherwise, there is PDF, my recommended format. and download doc. This will give you an RTF file, which is a rich text file. It is a kind of a more universal format for Word document. Word should be able to open it. If not, you just have to tell the system to let Word open that file type. But it's effectively a Word document. I recommend PDF. They are more consistent. Most people either use Adobe Reader or something that is fairly compatible with it. The PDF format is pretty consistent. It's, although proprietary, it's well known. So one reader to the next, it will look the same. Word docs, also a proprietary format of Microsoft's, although the RTF might be an open format, I can't remember, can look different in different versions of Word. This is something I've experienced, so I don't normally recommend it. Be sure to have tested and previewed your templates a couple times. Make sure it's what you want. You may have to go back and fine tune and adjust. If you ever ask support here to help you out with a template, we will normally, because of the consistency of PDF, attempt to make it work for that. But it's mostly because Word doc is from format to form, version to version can have variations. So let's go ahead and actually download our PDF. I think my browser should just open it up. I'm in Chrome. Yeah, I will. So it's generating the letters. It's creating the file. This can take a second, depending on the number of letters. This can take a little bit of time. Internet speed will matter. And here is my set of letters. So this one's not so bad. We can see our placeholder filled in a couple of things. Like this was for a client was using my system. Different letters for different things. So let's see if we can find, these will all be the same letter because I didn't have a mixed batch. But theoretically, if I had a batch with different letters, I would see different letters. So not too bad. Could use a little help on, could use a little adjustment on the left-hand margin here, but that's our letter. So let's close that out. So once you've downloaded your letter, you may also want to download envelopes for those letters. So I can go download envelope. We will select a template for those envelopes. I can edit that template. In these templates, you only usually need one for the whole system. I have two untitled, which I might modify. And here you can see I just built up the address and put your client status, client information stuff, placeholders, gave it a name, saved, and all that. So let me close it out. So at this point, I can then download. It's going to give me a PDF, and you'll just need to make sure to set up your printer to handle the printing of envelopes. And as we saw earlier, we can edit format, bring up fonts, lower the fonts, whatever you need to do, and make a pretty decent looking envelope. It is a number 10 envelope, if it matters, my understanding. And then once we do all of our printing, hit done printing. That tells the system that everything is done, and our batch will eventually say complete. Currently, it's not going to quite yet. So any questions about that process before we talk about how to handle batches you've previously done and review them? Okay, so one thing it's important to note is if I come to send acknowledgements, there's another button down here at the bottom called View History. And this will show every batch that we have generated or processed in some form previously. So when I initially hit that generate batch, if I was to leave and do something else and need to come back to that batch, I would go to View History and it would be marked as generated. That means the letters have been generated but not processed. When I've processed, as we saw, some but not all of them, partially processed, when the emails are still in the process of processing, i.e. being sent out, because that can take some time to get through the email relay service, they will be set to sent for processing. And then when everything's said and done, processed. There is a rare status of failed that usually is a result of something very strange, usually bad emails that somehow got into the system, i.e. Like email that's missing the domain name, for example. It's like Bob or bob@gmail, but no .com part. That can result in fails and a few other more exotic issues. So if that happens, might want to check out the records in that. We can usually give some assistance. We also can view the recipients or redo a batch. Redo basically says, okay, this entire batch, it never happened. Send everything back to the queue and start over. So we can redo the letters. View recipients lets us see who we sent to and potentially re-email or reprint. So this is a very excellent option for redoing mistakes if one occurred. Okay, that is donation acknowledgement. So we covered the setting of templates, the creation of templates, and the generation of batches, and the printing and sending of donation acknowledgement batches. One last thing I did mention earlier, default salutations. This is where you can find and set that for the system. But otherwise, any questions?